We all get knocked down by life sometimes, right? That ability to pick ourselves up, to truly bounce back, that's resilience.
Mm,
But it's not just about, some inherent toughness you're born with.
exactly. Not just luck.
So today we're taking a deep dive into what makes us resilient, looking at it from two really, really interesting perspectives.
Yeah, we're going to explore how different cultures and also some very long-standing traditions offer these, well, unique insights into facing and overcoming challenges.
Okay, so our first angle, it comes from this fascinating academic study, and it looks at resilience through a completely different lens culture, specifically focusing on Chinese philosophy.
Right.
The study itself is called Culturally Sensitive Conceptualization of Resilience. Quite a mouthful, but the key part is a multidimensional model of Chinese resilience, indigenous psychology.
And it suggests that our understanding of resilience, maybe what we think it is heavily influenced by our cultural background.
It digs into Confucianism, Buddhism, Taoism, and argues that, well, a lot of the research on resilience has been very Western-focused.
Yeah, potentially missing some key cultural aspects because of that focus.
What's interesting here, I think, is this idea that what we often consider resilience, those individual strengths, internal resources, that might not be the whole story.
That's a good point. The paper mentions that many well-known resilience scales, the ways researchers measure it, tend to focus on these individual traits.
Like what kind of traits?
Things like personal competence, how you see yourself, your self-efficacy. Think of those questionnaires asking about your confidence or maybe your problem-solving skills.
Right. Okay. So it's very much about you as an individual sort of powerhouse.
Pretty much, yeah.
But the study points out, and this seems crucial, that most of this research comes from Western countries, which, makes you wonder. Like other researchers, Unger was mentioned, have suggested, are we just applying our Western ideas everywhere else?
Without really checking if the concept even means the same thing across cultures.
Yeah, exactly. And Ramirez and Hammock also kind of cautioned against making these sweeping generalizations from, pretty limited cultural samples.
It really highlights how culture shapes everything, doesn't it? Even how we see adversity, how we react to tough times, what one culture sees as a key coping strength.
Might be less important or just understood differently somewhere else.
Precisely.
Which brings us nicely to the Chinese perspective explored in the paper. It looks at Confucianism, Buddhism, specifically Mahayana Buddhism, and Taoism.
Now, these aren't just like ancient historical ideas. They've profoundly shaped how people in Chinese culture view life itself.
And here's where it gets really insightful, I thought. The study suggests these philosophies offer powerful inner resources for navigating difficulties.
Yeah, and what's cool is that while they're distinct ways of thinking, they've also kind of blended and influenced each other over centuries.
So like Confucianism emphasizing social harmony, duty.
And Buddhism may be highlighting inner peace through understanding suffering.
And Taoism focusing on living in tune with nature, with the Tao, all offering these unique paths, you could say, for dealing with life's difficulties.
Exactly. And while the paper acknowledges individual capabilities are still important for people in Chinese cultures, it's not only about the individual.
Right.
These long-standing traditions, rooted in those philosophies, they also place significant emphasis on other factors. It's sort of a move away from a purely me-centric view.
Okay, so we're seeing this contrast emerge. A Western view often highlighting individual grit, maybe self-reliance, and a Chinese perspective that seems more interwoven with cultural, philosophical values, maybe community too.
Potentially, yeah. Broader influences seem key.
Okay, so hold that thought about cultural context. Let's shift gears now and look at our second source. This one's titled Indigenous Knowledge for Disaster Risk Reduction, and it's from Kyoto University.
Right, and this takes us from those philosophical concepts to the very practical, lived wisdom of communities facing environmental challenges.
So what's this source about broadly?
Well, what's fascinating here is that it examines how communities, specifically in the Asia-Pacific region, have survived and coped with natural disasters for generations. We're talking centuries.
Wow, centuries.
Yeah, by using their indigenous knowledge. This is resilience in action, refined through countless real-world experiences.
Absolutely. So this isn't abstract theory at all. It's about real practices that have proven effective over long, long periods.
Exactly. And the report emphasizes how incredibly rich and diverse this indigenous knowledge is in the Asia-Pacific.
Why is it so diverse there specifically?
Well, think about it. You've got ancient civilizations. The region faces many different kinds of natural hazards, earthquakes, typhoons, floods, you name it.
Right.
Plus diverse cultures living closely with often limited resources. All this has led to incredibly resourceful, often low-cost ways of life that naturally bake this knowledge into how they prepare for and recover from disasters.
Okay, that makes sense. And the source mentions a key idea, transferable indigenous knowledge.
This is important. It isn't just about, quaint local customs. It's about identifying knowledge that, while maybe specific to one place or culture,
might hold valuable lessons for other communities. Or even for us today, generations later.
Exactly. That's the transferable part.
So what makes indigenous knowledge transferable, according to this report? Are there, criteria?
Yeah, they lay out some really clear points. First, it needs to be understandable and implementable, practical, doable. Yeah. It has to come from the communities themselves based on their actual needs and their cultural context. It can't just be imposed from outside.
Okay.
And importantly, it should offer sort of core knowledge, but be flexible enough to be adapted to different local situations. You can't just copy-paste it everywhere.
Right. Context matters again.
Definitely. It should also use local skills, local materials, have a proven history of being useful, time-tested, essentially, and be applicable in other places or across generations.
So it really boils down to wisdom tested by experience, adaptable, rooted in place. It's a powerful reminder that innovation doesn't always mean inventing something brand new, does it?
Not at all. And this recognition of indigenous knowledge is so important. The report argues it's not just some charming tradition. It's a vital part of a truly comprehensive approach to reducing disaster risks.
It's about valuing that deep understanding, those coping mechanisms that evolved over time.
And finding ways to connect this, maybe integrate it, with modern technologies for more effective solutions. Not in either situation.
Yeah, the report even shares an example, I think, from a UN publication.
That's right, UNSDR, pointing out that communities worldwide use these time-honored indigenous methods for preparedness and response way before high-tech early warning systems existed.
And the real potential now lies in combining that wisdom with modern tech.
Exactly. Creating solutions that are both relevant to the local context and effective using the tools we have now.
Okay, so building on that idea of culture shaping resilience, now we're seeing how whole communities, particularly in the Asia-Pacific, cultivate it through cultural heritage and their connection to the environment.
Yes, and the report highlights how this indigenous knowledge actually aligns pretty well with international frameworks, like the priorities under the Hyogo Framework for Action, the HFA.
How so? What kind of priorities?
Well, things like setting up institutional structures for disaster risk reduction, doing risk assessments, providing early warnings, promoting a culture of safety and resilience through education, reducing the underlying causes of risks, and strengthening disaster preparedness right down at the local level. Indigenous knowledge has something to contribute to all of those.
Right. It's not separate. It's part of the solution across the board. Now, the report gets specific, doesn't it? It delves into particular areas where this knowledge is especially valuable for resilience, places like mountain ecosystems.
Yeah, and coastal zones, too.
Yeah.
Let's start with the mountains. These are really unique environments, obviously, with a whole range of challenges. Different altitudes, earthquakes, landslides, difficult farming conditions.
For sure.
And the communities there have developed incredibly sophisticated practices. Think about slope farming techniques to prevent soil erosion, or even how some manage water by, manipulating glaciers, glacier grafting.
Wow.
And that practice of moving livestock between different altitudes, seasonally vertical transhumance, that's another example of adapting to make the most of the environment.
And the report has that interesting equation about transferability in mountains.
Yes. Transferability, usability, or adaptability, X environment. It's a neat way to put it.
What does the environment part capture there?
It's not just the physical environment, like the altitude or climate. It's also the social structures, the enabling conditions, even how people perceive the practice. All that affects whether it can be successfully adapted elsewhere.
Got it. Okay, then shifting to coastal zones. Totally different set of threats, right? Cyclones, storm surges, coastal erosion.
Completely different, yeah. But the report emphasizes that despite these huge challenges, coastal communities often possess this wealth of indigenous knowledge about the ocean, weather patterns, sustainable living.
Like using local materials for building.
Exactly. Or relying on natural buffers like mangrove forests for protection against storms. There's often a deep ecological understanding embedded there.
But it's not all rosy. The report also points out some serious challenges these communities face now.
Oh, definitely. Things like pollution, coastal development pressures, the globalization of fishing, they can really disrupt these long-standing practices and the knowledge systems behind them.
Even just getting modern warnings out effectively can be tough.
Yeah, disseminating information, especially early warnings. And of course, climate change is a huge overlay, impacting these already delicate ecosystems and the traditional knowledge linked to them.
And the report mentions something about transferring knowledge between coastal areas being difficult too.
That's right. Different coastal topographies might require different adaptations, and reaching isolated communities to share or document knowledge can be a real hurdle. There's a big need stressed in the report to bridge traditional understanding and modern science in these coastal regions.
Makes sense. And the discussion also touches on river basins, right? And climate change impacts there.
Changing rainfall, temperature patterns, they affect traditional knowledge related to water management, agriculture, etc. And again, the report highlights this critical need for collaboration, bringing together the indigenous knowledge holders and the scientific experts.
And what about housing? That seemed like a key area too.
Definitely. The report emphasizes how traditional or vernacular architecture often uses local materials and techniques in ways that have proven surprisingly resilient to disasters, like earthquakes.
But these practices are being lost.
In some places, yeah. Sometimes due to a lack of respect or just the pressures of modern development, new materials, changing lifestyles. But there's this huge, often untapped potential to learn from these time-tested building methods.
And maybe integrate them with modern construction.
Exactly. Not necessarily going back completely, but finding ways to combine the best of both worlds.
The report even floated some policy ideas around housing, didn't it?
Yeah, things like investing more in R&D on traditional techniques, providing training and education, maybe even supporting local tourism in ways that help artisans keep these skills alive.
Okay, so this leads us naturally into policy and action more broadly. How do we actually integrate this indigenous knowledge? The report talks about entry points.
Yes. It points out that often this knowledge isn't like a separate thing. It's deeply embedded in the way people live, their way of life.
So how do you make policy out of that?
Well, the challenge is to identify some broad, maybe universally applicable principles, but illustrate them with specific local examples. That's what can inform policy decisions effectively.
And advocacy is needed too, I imagine.
Crucial at all levels, local, national, even international, to get indigenous knowledge recognized and properly included in government strategies.
Yeah.
Not just for disasters, but also for climate change adaptation, sustainable development.
It needs to be seen as a valid, valuable input.
Precisely.
Education seems like another key lever.
Absolutely. The report suggests developing curricula, maybe using databases of indigenous knowledge, to promote and mainstream it in how we teach about disasters, the environment, development.
So it becomes part of the standard knowledge base?
Ideally, yes. And it's also about creating a policy landscape, an environment that supports this integration across different sectors, techno-legal, socioeconomic, cultural, and influences existing programs like school safety initiatives.
Are there other key areas mentioned for promoting IK?
Yeah, a few others. Creating that overall enabling environment we talked about, identifying key people, change agents, both at policy levels and within communities who can champion this, and focusing on specific cross-cutting areas where IK is particularly relevant, like gender dimensions, urban risks, climate adaptation, and food security.
Okay, so let's try and bring these threads together now. We started with the idea of resilience itself, and we've seen that it's really not just one thing, is it? The Chinese philosophical perspective gave us these insights into inner strength, coping mechanisms rooted in cultural values.
Right, a more internal, perhaps psychosocial dimension grounded in philosophy.
And then the indigenous knowledge source showed us community-level resilience built up through generations of practical experience closely tied to the environment.
Very much about adaptation, practical wisdom, intergenerational learning in the face of external environmental challenges.
And the big takeaway linking them seems to be context.
Absolutely. Both sources, in their own ways, hammer home how crucial context is, whether it's the cultural beliefs shaping how you see adversity, or the specific environmental conditions you're adapting to, or the social structures that support coping.
It all matters. Which really makes you question any idea of a one-size-fits-all approach to building resilience. You just can't, can you?
No, it seems clear you can't. This deep dive really shows that to truly grasp resilience, we need to look beyond just, individual personality traits. We need to appreciate this rich tapestry of cultural wisdom and practical knowledge that communities have developed over centuries.
So to sum up then, resilience is definitely complex, multifaceted, and deeply shaped by culture. Chinese philosophies offer one lens, focusing perhaps more on inner strength and perspective,
while the indigenous knowledge from the Asia-Pacific provides another, highlighting these community-based, environmentally attuned strategies honed over time.
Both give us valuable perspectives that go beyond those potentially more limited, individualistic Western models we started with.
Definitely richer, broader perspectives, which leads to a really interesting question, I think, for you listening. How might understanding these culturally sensitive views, these philosophical frameworks, and learning from these time-tested indigenous practices, how might that enrich how we approach building resilience in our own lives, in our own communities, wherever we are?
Regardless of our background or location.
Exactly. Is there some overlooked wisdom there, maybe from traditions or local knowledge closer to home even, that could hold a key to navigating the challenges we face today?
That's a really thought-provoking question to leave people with. Some fascinating ideas to consider there.
For sure.
We definitely encourage you to explore these sources further if this sparked your interest and just delve deeper into this whole world of cultural perspectives on resilience and the incredible value of indigenous knowledge in our constantly changing world.